Hello, everybody out there in viewerland. Welcome to the Pen Parentis Literary Salon. I am M.M. DeVoe. I'm the founder of Pen Parentis, and I'm the co-host of tonight's salon. Pen Parentis is a literary nonprofit, and our mission is to help writers stay on creative track after they start a family. These literary salons were created to break negative stereotypes around writers who are also parents by presenting a vast diversity of authors who happen to have kids. We will hear readings, we will talk craft, and as always, we will try to figure out how the heck they all did it. And hopefully you will all leave tonight inspired to write, no matter what your situation. If you are a writer who has kids, you can find out more about our nonprofit at penparentis.org. I encourage you to check it out. And now a word from our sponsor. This 25th anniversary season of Pen Parentis Literary Salons is funded in part by poets and writers through public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. I want to thank them and also to thank our wonderful sustaining title members and our generous board and those of you who made individual donations when you ordered your ticket tonight. Thank you all so much. The theme of tonight's salon is first generation, which is a theme very close to my heart because, as some of you know, I am a first generation Lithuanian American, and Lithuanian was actually my first spoken language. But I will now bring on Christina Chu, who is the curator of these salons and my co-host for tonight's event, and she will be telling us a little bit more about the authors and everything. And there we go. Hi, Christina.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Milda. This is really, it's exciting to be here because I think first generation is a topic that a lot of people actually are interested in and talking about right now. We have three incredible authors tonight. Our first author tonight is Kris Jansma. He's the author of Why We Came to the City and the Unchangeable Spots of Leopards. Isn't that a great title? He's the winner. It's the winner of the Sherwood Anderson Foundation Fiction Award. He's also won a Pushcart Prize, and he's the recipient of an honorable mention for the Penn Hemingway Award. Yeah, that is pretty awesome. He's written for The Times, Chicago Quarterly Review, Zizva, The Believer, Prairie Schooner, and Electric Literature. His work has been noted as distinguished in the Best American Short Stories 2016 and the Best American Essays of 2014. He's Associate Professor of English and the Director of Creative Writing at SUNY New Paltz, and he lives in Westchester with his wife and two children.
And one of his kids has a birthday today.
Tonight.
4 years old today. Happy birthday, baby.
We're very excited.
Please welcome Christopher.
Yay, Christopher, you get to read. Ready, set, go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to thank Pen Parentis for inviting me tonight. This is my third time reading with Pen Parentis. I read once right after my older son was born. The last time was actually when my daughter, who's just now turned 4, was about to be born. So it's very exciting to be back again tonight. I'm going to read a little bit from a new work in progress. This is called Vrijbuiter, which is a Dutch word, which means freebooter, which is, I guess, a term for a pirate. This is a little story I wrote about my first-generation relatives. Will Van S. had never had particularly strong feelings about being Dutch. But then the pandemic and the shutdown began, and he had begun craving cheese. A certain orange yellow in rounds or wedges encased in a deep red wax. Gouda, which he had seen as a boy, being sold from a cart in a marketplace in Delft when he was 9 or 10 years old. Wheels of cheese the size of his father. He remembered the trip and all the old churches that his father had insisted they go into, even if no one in his family believed in God, something he was just at that age beginning to add up. His grandfather and great-grandfather, each named Wilhelm, for whom Will was named, had been an artisan. Elaborate inlaid woodworkings that adorned some of these churches and other halls of power, including the inside of the International Court of Justice at The Hague, where they tried war criminals. The Peace Palace, they called it. And in the ceilings and along the walls were these intricate puzzles of wooden pieces, shades of reds and browns that formed vast mosaic miracles. As a boy, he'd been unable to grasp it, aside from a sense that this was part of his own blood, his DNA, even before he knew what that was. This is who you are. You are made of this. Will's mother had been careful to keep the cheese on hand in case her mother-in-law came to visit, and the kitchen decorated with delft, the distinct white and blue ceramic tiles of windmills and tulips and wooden shoes. Will had always found this curious since his mother was not Dutch and had a strange relationship with his father's mother. Oma, they always called her, or at least since Will had been born. Will's mother, Carol, who his own children now called Marmee at her insistence, was some mixture of Welsh and English and Irish via Buffalo, a lineage of shearers and kingmen that got lost going back past a few generations. He had never had particularly strong feelings about that side of the family either, aside from the scant possibility that his children might have red hair like his mother's, but of course they hadn't. His own wife, Teru, was Japanese, or her parents both had been. And so now their twin daughters were half Japanese, 1/4 Dutch and 1/4 United Kingdom hodgepodge, but that was somewhat overshadowed. They looked Japanese, more than anything else, and they were named Yui and Nico. People were often a bit unsure what Will's role even was in all this. At playgrounds, dropping them off, picking them up. Once, someone had asked him how he had been able to adopt them both as a pair. The food from his mother's side was a series of casseroles, always bound up with Campbell's cream of mushroom soup. He had no desire for these as the stress of quarantine settled in, just the Gouda cheese. He wasn't the only one. His friends were all reporting similarly intense cravings for their own ancestral foods, rice, beets, tamales, etc. Teru wanted bowl after bowl of thick white congee, especially with rusung on top, some kind of thin dried meat. Will had known her for 10 years and had never seen her eat it before, and now the sink was full of empty bowls with streaks of the porridgey stuff hardening inside. Will was sure that Teru felt the same way he did about the cheese, not just the taste of it, but the feel of it, removing the red wax, the thinner orange layer beneath it, cutting cubes of it to be consumed with Ritz crackers like his mother had done at every Oma visit when he was young, or pulling the metal slicer down the slope of the wedge, watching the curls forming on the other side, thin slices that could be put on buttered toast, eaten plain, or layered onto roast beef with mustard in the sandwiches Oma had made for him as a boy. Her own mother had lived to 106 years old, survived both world wars and the entire 20th century, eating mostly smoked fish, Nutella, and this amazing cheese. When the subject came up, Will had his go-to story about his father, and it was this. At age 6 or 7, he and two friends from the neighborhood got the idea to open up a little lemonade stand down near the entrance to the tennis courts. They got a big thing of Suntime powder from someone's mother in a big jug and some cups. Will remembered that it had been his job to do the sign, and he'd carefully spelled out the word lemonade and 25 cents in a rainbow of bright, attractive colors. They'd been out there the better part of the day, and business had been good. People coming to play tennis would buy a cup, sometimes 2 or 3 even, on the way in and on the way out. Just before 5 o'clock, when the mothers would begin sounding the call for dinner, Wynn had counted their earnings at $7.50, or $2.50 each. He'd already begun deciding which comics he'd be buying with the money on Saturday when they went to the store, when he heard one of his friends shouting. A man was rushing towards them from the trees on the right side. He was wearing a bright blue bandana over the lower part of his face and a big white cowboy hat that Will recognized as the same one his father kept on the peg in their family room. It was his father, no doubt about it, rushing towards them with a bit of rope in one hand that had been tied into a lasso. He didn't lasso anyone with it. Will doubt he'd have known how, but he did whip it around in a sufficiently terrifying way that Will's friends both screamed and fled the scene, leaving him there to face his father alone. Dumbfounded, Will stood there as his father hooted and hollered and grabbed the little box that they'd put their money into and mimed shooting guns in the air. "That's ours," Will tried to say, but he couldn't quite make the words form. Not because he was scared, it was just his dad, after all, and he knew his dad would never hurt anyone, but because he couldn't really understand what was happening. "You've been robbed by the Blue Bandit," his father cackled, rubbing his belly cartoonishly. "That ought to teach you a lesson." And then he pushed the stand over, spilling the lemonade all over the sign Will had made, and turned and ran off into the woods with the money. When Will's friends ventured back to the stand, they wanted to know what the hell was the matter with his dad. Will said he had no idea. He helped clean up the mess. The ruined sign went in the dumpster with the crushed cups and the box they'd used as a stand. And then the call came out for dinner, so he went home. Will found his father sitting at the dinner table like nothing had happened. The blue bandana was gone, the white cowboy hat back up on its peg. "We want our money back," Will said. "Wash your hands up," his father said. "We want our money back." "I don't have your money," his father shrugged. "What money?" "What money, sweetie?" his mother had asked. My friends and I set up a lemonade stand. We worked hard all day. We made $7.50, and then Dad came and knocked it all over and took our money. Me? His father looked affronted. Me? Why would I do a thing like that? Come on, you did. You had a blue bandana and a hat, and you took it. His father looked over at the hat and then back at Will. Blue bandana? Blue bandana? Wait, are you telling me that you were robbed by the Blue Bandit? Stop it, Will yelled. I heard he'd been spotted around these parts, my father shouted. You and your friends should really have brought some protection. The look on his mother's face, trying to hide her amusement, even knowing how upset her son was. If this was a lesson in toughness, Will thought, then fine, he could be tough. Cut it out. Give us our money back. This Blue Bandit is one mean piece of work, my father whistled. It sounds like maybe he did you a favor, teaching you to watch your back. It was you, Will said. But his father just shook his head and looked baffled. His mother silently chewed the meatloaf she'd prepared for everyone and did nothing. Toughness, maybe, was not the goal. Will had begged, cried, and finally thrown a fit, but nothing ever got his father to return the money or admit that he'd been the Blue Bandit. Later, Will searched everywhere for the bandana as if that would prove it once and for all, but it had not turned up. The other boys didn't speak to Will for the rest of the summer, and there was no lemonade stand ever again after that. Thank you, everybody.
Yay! That was great fun. I wanted to just go around and make sure that everybody gets introduced so that we know just by name. Tina Chang is a Brooklyn poet, laureate, poet, person, human of great consequence. Esther Amini is a memoirist of great consequence. Her memoir is coming out very shortly. And Kris Jansma, you heard his extraordinary bio. You're going to get to hear the other two extraordinary bios shortly. But so the theme is first generation. And Kris, you read about your family that is first generation, but you are not. Is that correct?
No, my father was born in Chicago. His parents were both Dutch, and they came over after World War II. I think, about 10 years after the end of World War II, so sometime in the 50s. So I guess my father then is the first sort of, American in the family. And my grandmother Oma is still with us. In fact, she called while I was reading. So I think her ears were burning.
That's excellent. So, Christina, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself. And what were you going to say then?
So what I was saying was what's really interesting about this topic is that it always comes up. This is who you are, and I noticed that you talk so much about food and how food identifies who you are, and that was really interesting, especially since you brought up the you have two Japanese nephews, right?
It just in the story that part, I took some of my family story and sort of merged it with a friend of mine. The two of us we've been talking a lot recently about this sort of weird thing that's happened in the pandemic to both of us, where we've been weirdly craving these foods that are kind of linked to our heritage in different ways. So I just needed something to kind of counterpoint the cheese too.
It's so wonderful that you're actually talking about the pandemic and dealing with the pandemic in your work. That's so wonderful.
Yeah, it was fun to have an excuse to write about it. I've been looking for sort of a good way into it.
Tina, your last poem that I saw on the subway wall was about food as well. It was, do you want to talk about how that happened and how you got that poem on the subway? It was very impressive. Poetry in motion. You're muted though. You have to unmute.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for asking. That is a poem I was very surprised that they chose, because I think it might have been a poem that I wrote when I was in my early 20s or something, when I wasn't a parent. I probably wrote that sometime right before graduate school, when I was entering into graduate school. So I was very surprised that they just found it, I think probably in my first book, and decided to publish it. And I wrote that actually when I was living in Taiwan. I had traveled to Taiwan to try to improve my Chinese, to search for my father's spirit, because my father had died when I was very, very young. And so I thought if I traveled to Taiwan, I might find out something about him that I didn't know before. So I wrote that poem when I was there. And just from sort of taking down notes and jotting it down, and then suddenly out of the blue, over 30 years after writing it, the Poetry Society of America suddenly contacted me and said, oh, we were thinking we'd like to really put it on, in the transit system somewhere. And then my children, fast forward many years later, my children were able to ride the subway and we were able to talk about it and talk about the meanings that it had. And it was very beautiful because I also found that lots of people wrote to me as a result of that being on the train.
Nice. Not just your children, but many, many children.
Yes. Actually, a grandmother wrote to me about having a connection to her grandson and that they weren't really getting along before that, but they somehow read the poem and she understood that he loved poetry and they found a connection to each other and started talking about the poem. So she just wanted to write to me to thank me for that moment that they had together. So that's the beauty of poetry, what it can spark.
It's so neat. Food really is such a connection. Esther, you are first generation, yeah?
I am first generation. My parents came from Iran and they arrived here in the United States in 1947. So it was right after World War II, and a few years later I was born in New York. Yeah.
So I think we can hear from Esther's memoir. What do you think?
Let's hear from you, Esther.
Introduce her. Let's all listen in on her amazing bio. Go.
It is amazing, and I'm just going to highlight the best parts. Esther is a writer. She's such a creative. She's a painter, and she, get this, is a psychoanalytic psychotherapist. Her stories have appeared in Elle, Lilith, Tablet, The Jewish Week, and Barnard Magazine, and others. She was named one of Aspen Ward's 2 best emerging memoirists and awarded its Emerging Writer Fellowship in 2016 based on her memoir, Concealed.
So let us hear Esther read from her novel.
Wait, no, I'm still...
you can keep talking. Go ahead, Christina. We can hear you.
Her Kirkus Reviews named Concealed one of the best 2020 indie books, and Chai Flix, the Jewish Netflix, is presently streaming an excerpt from Concealed called Amrika. Yes, Esther?
Thank you, Esther.
It's Amrika.
Amrika, thank you.
Congratulations on that 2020. That's impressive to be one of the best books. Good job.
Thank you.
Very happy for you.
Okay, so do you want me to read at this point?
Yes, please read.
Okay, I'm going to read a few paragraphs from a chapter called About Faiths. One Saturday afternoon, offering chai to my father, my brothers, our Shabbat guests, I approached a group of men seated in the upper half of our living room, interrupting a heated discussion on the shifting price of Persian rugs. Reaching for tongs, they helped themselves to 3, sometimes 4 lumps of sugar. Then, with a cube clamped between their front teeth, they slowly sipped their steaming hot chai before resuming their conversation. Persian men didn't spend Saturday afternoons discussing sports, travel, the latest Hollywood films, nor was the advancement of women ever touched upon. Instead, they agonized over the loose morals and lack of ethics rampant in American business, politics, the stunning disregard of rules. There isn't an equivalent Anglo-Saxon word that could accurately convey Abru's weight and power, a tenet of daily Persian life. To Persians, it means honor, standing, reputation, status, all rolled in one. Accumulating and maintaining Abru is centrally important. If your great-grandfather, grandfather, and father lived honest and ethical lives of integrity, wisdom, and proper social conduct, then when you're born, you inherit their honor. Abru, a respected face, becomes your social currency, wealth, even a credit line, unless lost through missteps. In Iran, ill conduct didn't just damage one's own social status, it had lasting multi-generational effects, tainting the reputation and prospects of future descendants. If parents lost face, they couldn't marry off daughters or find suitable wives for their sons. Abru, both inherited and earned, came with built-in incentives to live up to what was passed down and accumulate more for future generations. Obligations to ancestors and descendants were values my long-haired, bell-bottom generation rejected. But even though I told myself the traditions of Abru and Khajalat, which means shame, were ancient and obsolete, they took root deep inside my nagging conscience. When I stormed out of the house in indigo denim a la Joan Baez, I heard voices judging me as Abru, without honor. I couldn't go to a rock concert without looking over my shoulder and feeling indecent. I couldn't stroll through Central Park's chic meadow with its sunbathers and hippies without feeling I was humiliating my father, sullying his Abru. Freedom and guilt melded together. Deep, deep down, I felt I was the delinquent daughter destroying thousands of years of accrued Abru. Under layers of reasoning, I felt I was wrong and he was right.
Yay!
Esther, you talked about something about face, and I think face is such a first generation concept. And it gets kind of like passed down, right? This idea of face and needing, or maybe it's just not so much of an American ideal as it is in other countries. And then I know I grew up with this idea of face, like you have no face. If my parents said that to me, that was like bad. I mean, I would walk away feeling horrible. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like how, you know.
But are you saying in your case it had a multi-generational feeling as well? Like if you did something that was considered delinquent by your parents' culture, did you feel it would have an impact on the next generation?
Oh, yes, because people would know.
Right, right. Right.
Yeah, that never went away. I mean, it's exactly the way you described it, you know, and it's the same like things that your grandfather did, right? Like he was an honorable man. They all talked about him, right? Tina, did you ever have like things like this in your family?
Sorry, one second. Yes, can you hear me? Yes, I think that's why I wrote the most recent collection, is when I made the decision to have a mixed race family. That was pretty much the conversation that was on the table. And I think that, you know, Christina, you talked about it in such a way that it was so meaningful to you. You know, this idea of saving face is very, very important in the Chinese culture, meaning that you never want to do anything to embarrass your family, your parents, and your ancestors. So I think that when I decided, made a firm decision, I will have a mixed race family. I will love the person or love the individuals that I want to love, irregardless of anything that my family thinks and feels. I think I had to actually give up on this idea, really give up on it, like put it away somewhere where I wasn't concerned anymore for saving any face. That what mattered the most was the way I decided to live my life, the way I wanted to dictate my life. And what was most important was that love was on the table. And so I thought then saving face didn't matter anymore. And that was a hard, very, very difficult thing to put away. I'm saying it like it was so quick, but it was a very long process.
Yeah.
I think it transforms into something else. You know, I think I can't speak for you, but I have a hunch that it is what it is for me as well. That I had to, over time, decide what Albrew means to me. You know, it may not be what it meant to my parents or my ancestors, but let's say being ethical, let's say being honest, let's say being true to myself was my Albrew.
Yeah.
And so I had to redefine it. You know, in the culture my parents came from, and they came from the city of Mashhad, which is a fanatical, fundamentalist city in Iran. Women were not allowed to learn to read and write. And so for me to write this book, being the first female from both my father and mother's side, that ever went to school, whoever became literate, and to write the book was defying this ancient notion of Albrew, of what a woman does do, what a woman doesn't do. It's disgraceful. You're disgracing the community, your family, and tainting future generations. So, you know, of course, I had to battle that internally in my own head in order to write the memoir.
I think, yeah, I mean, isn't it like when you redefine it, integrity doesn't change. It's just your version of integrity, right? Like, so.
And yet Esther had a really good point on the obligation to your ancestors. When you put it that way, and you say you have an obligation to your ancestors, as opposed to, of course, American freedom and your responsibility as an American to take care of the individual yourself, right? I mean, we raise our kids to be the best they can be, to go as far as they can possibly go. Like, it's up to them to discover who they are. Whereas I as a first generation was definitely given an obligation to my ancestors. You will learn this language because the Soviets have taken over Lithuania. And if you don't learn it, it's going to go away. Like, it is up to you, person, to learn this language. So, like, it's a pretty heavy burden to carry.
I wouldn't knock it too quickly, you know, because as much as I hear what you're saying, it's a burden. At the same time, there's something very beautiful about making room in your narcissistic self, which we all have, and making room for those who came before us and those who will come after us, and try to keep that in mind instead of the me culture. You know, I will do what I want. I'm free.
But it's interesting when your parents are telling you why you should be doing something, the feeling that Tina was expressing of, you know, well, wait, what about my heart? What about what I want? What about my love? They do say it's narcissistic. They tell you that, you know, it's not about you.
Yeah.
And so it turns into, well, should I betray myself for my ancestors? As opposed to, Esther, I love your idea of embracing it as like a beautiful, like, honor. Who doesn't want to be honorable? We all want to honor our ancestors, and we all want to honor, well, maybe not everybody, but there is a sense that honor is a good thing. Whatever that means to you, that honor is something valuable. Kris, you haven't said a word. Could you jump in?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So I don't have a lot of that hanging
honor?
over me. Maybe as a, which is maybe you know, something I'd always seen growing up as a little bit of, you know, I don't know, it's just sort of nice that I didn't have this, you know, my family, like, unlike a lot of the families of my friends, were, you know, we weren't very, like, attached to our culture in any way. And I had, you know, I had friends that were first generation Americans and Chinese Americans and Indian Americans who, you know, had, like, you know, really very, you know, sort of what seemed to me like very strict parents who really had big expectations for them. And mine did as well, but, you know, they weren't coming from our, like, Dutch heritage, which, like, to me never meant anything. You know, we had been there, we traveled there, you know, I knew the food, but, you know, it's sort of one of those weird things, like, there aren't, like, a lot of stereotypes about the Dutch. There aren't, like, you know, we're not known for being a certain way or doing things a certain way, or at least it wasn't really passed down to me that we were. And so what's happened kind of in a weird way is like kind of now as an adult, I've started kind of going back and realizing a little bit where some of these things are coming in. Just one quick example, but one time I met someone else that was Dutch, and he refused to cross his, I think he was like refusing to jaywalk. And he said, oh, you get it. You're Dutch like me. Like, you have to follow all the rules. And I was like, whoa, is that part of it? Because I am that way. And my dad is that way. But I thought that was just part of his personality. I didn't know it had anything to do. Like, I didn't know that was a part of our Dutch heritage. And so anyway, part of where the story that I was reading came from is early in the pandemic. I started weekly phone calls with my grandmother to kind of check in and make sure she was doing okay, because she lives alone down in New Jersey, and I'm kind of the closest person to her. And so anyway, through a lot of these phone calls, I've been trying to kind of get more and more of this out a little bit. I'm sort of having to hunt for it rather than knowing where it's coming from.
Yeah,
I think it's me, but
it's interesting that things get passed down and you don't even realize.
Right, exactly. And I'm in the process of passing them down to my own children, but I don't know where they're coming from. Yeah.
So interesting.
So this actually came up with Esther, and I was going to ask you about this also. When my first book came out, my parents said, "You have no face." They were not happy. Esther, did your parents take issue with your work? Any of you guys?
Well, my book came out in April, and my mother died 20 years ago. And my father died 24 years ago. So there's a lot of distance, which I needed in order to really wrap myself around the story and really understand it through their eyes. So no, I didn't experience that. And what I did discover was a lot of the Persian Jews from the city of Mashhad live in Great Neck. There's a very tight community. And I did receive a lot of emails and phone calls from people I know and from people I don't know, thanking me for the book, which was a surprise. I mean, I didn't know how people would react. Basically saying, you put our story down, and it's a first. It's a first memoir. It's a first personal account of what it was like to live in that city of Mashhad, which I did not experience. My parents did, but I've heard thousands of stories, and what it's like to grow up with 1 foot in medieval Mashhad, because my father brought that city into our living room in Kew Gardens, Queens. So I felt like I had 1 foot in medieval Mashhad and the other was in 20th century America. And to be caught, culture clash, lots of collision, opposites, not understanding each other, the two cultures. And so the community, many people responded by saying, wow, Esther, you nailed it. I mean, that's exactly how I felt. That's how my children feel. And that was wonderful to hear, because I had no idea what I would get as a result.
It's very exciting. It's
You know,
good that you got such a good reception. That's wonderful. Yeah. That should actually hearten people who, this morning I did a meetup with a bunch of writers, and one of them is writing a memoir, and brought up, we were talking about the fact that the Salon was happening tonight, and it was about first generation. And she was revealing that frequently she feels that maybe she shouldn't be telling her story because other people's stories should be told instead. And we had this very interesting and intimate discussion about the fact that it's not about whether you have the right to tell your own story, because you always have the right to tell your own story. And what's wonderful is that there normally are people out there who want to hear it, who will identify with it. There is a reader out there who wants to hear about, a Persian immigrant. This is like their story as well. And so it's less about, we were sort of saying, well, maybe it's the publishers that should be making sure that every single story gets told, and that like they're not just telling one story and excluding other people. But the writers should all tell their own story if they feel the need to do so. Like, you have to feel that you can talk. You have to.
Well, I think with Esther's book in particular, so much is about being concealed. And she's bringing everything to light. And I think that's really that's part of the writer's job, right? To speak their truth, whatever that truth might be. So it's really nice to see that it really was so well received. I mean, you know, didn't you sell like over something like 3,000 copies or some crazy thing like that during COVID? I mean, it's amazing. It's so wonderful.
Yay.
But, you know, to get back to what you were saying, I think so much has to do with our own inner voice. Before we even get to society, before we even get to the literary agents and the publishers, and, you know, are they willing to accept stories that are different? Before we even get to that, you know, I think so many of us, I certainly went through it and heard others say, I don't feel entitled. I don't feel good enough. I don't feel I have a real story to tell. And you know, I love to read. I appreciate great literature, but I don't think I can do it. You know, and it's all like this inner script where we are telling ourselves we're not good enough. We're basically not good enough. And you know, and how to knock that voice out, how to extract it, how to free ourselves up so that we can say, yeah, the hell with that severe critic inside of us, you know, push that voice aside, and I'm going to write for me. I'm writing for me. I'm not writing for anybody else. And I'm not going to show it to anyone else, okay? If that frees me up, then that's what I have to say to myself. And yeah, I think we have to con that critic by coming up with some kind of story. I know I did that. I kept saying, well, I heard that voice over and over again, and it was the voice of my child. I really knew it was coming from a city I had never even visited that was saying, how dare you? How dare you? There will be consequences. And I had to almost like inebriate that voice, get it drunk, and tell myself, I'm just doing this for me. No one will read it. No one will read it. And that's how I got through the whole thing. But I think everyone's got to have a gimmick, a way in which they can knock down the barriers that they themselves create.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
All right, I'm ready for another humongous bio.
Yes.
Ah!
Our final reader tonight is Tina Chang, and I'm absolutely amazed that this is the first time I'm actually meeting her.
You are meeting her. Everybody's meeting her. Here she is.
So I know you were around at the beginning of the Asian American Writers Workshop, and I was one of the founding members. So it's like shocking to me that I'm meeting you now, finally. I'm really, really happy about this. Tina Chang is the Brooklyn Poet Laureate. Yay! She's the author of the poetry collections Tabrida, Of Gods and Strangers, Half-Lit Houses. She's also the co-editor of the Norton anthology Language of a New Century, contemporary poetry from the Middle East, Asia, and beyond. Her poems have been published in journals such as The American Poet, McSweeney, The New York Times, and Plowshares. She's received awards from the Academy of American Poets, the New York Foundation for the Arts, Poets and Writers, among others. She's the director of creative writing at Binghamton University and lives in Brooklyn with her family. This is her second appearance here with Pen Prentice.
Yay! Yay! Should I start? Is that good?
Ready?
Hi, everyone.
Ready?
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. As Christina and Milda had mentioned, or maybe I mentioned it with Milda as well, that I have read one other time with Pen Prentice, and Milda reminded me that the last time we were together in person. It was at a very loud bar.
It was so loud.
It was so loud. The other reader was Marie Howe. It was just such a beautiful.
It was so
evening.
great.
And I told her, when all of this is over, when the lockdown, when the pandemic is over, just let's unleash all the parents and just let them out of their homes, and we'll all meet at a bar and we'll all have a marathon reading. It'll just be so beautiful. I have felt a lot of support from parents during this time. So thank you, Melda. Thank you, Christina Chu. I feel like I have so many things to say as a result of the discussion so far, but I'll try to hold it. I can say that, meeting Christina Chu for me is like meeting a superstar, one of the founders of the Asian American Writers Workshop. I think I dreamed of meeting Christina for so long, and I promise I will meet you in person one day. I felt I had an opportunity to meet all the other founders and actually be very, very good friends with people like Curtis Chin over the years. And then I think, it was just the elusive Christina Chu. So I'm so grateful to be in her presence. Melda, all of the readers tonight, thank you so much. I wanted to say that I was very appreciative, Esther, for your thoughts. I was thinking a lot about what you were saying about how feelings, this idea of the feelings, the difficult feelings that we have with ancestry, with the family that we come from, it transforms. So I was thinking about that word transformation. It really impacted me when you said that. I'm going to read a piece that has a very close association with a lot of the things that we've already been talking about. I guess I sort of loosely interpreted first generation, but the piece that I'll be reading does have a lot to do with that. It has to do with the traveling of bodies and families to be able to arrive here in America, and then what happens. I'm going to be reading from my collection called Hybrida. And it talks about, it's really the story of my mixed race son. He's half Haitian American. His father's from Haiti, first generation Haitian American. And me, his Chinese American mother, and how we arrived here. It is also from this collection. I was just thinking it is Valentine's Day almost. And if you have a literary friend and you want to get them, or if it's not a literary friend and you want to get them a gift, this gorgeous book called The Kiss, edited by Brian Turner. The piece that I'll be reading also appears in that book. It's just a beautiful book about kisses. So if you think about it, there's so many different kinds of kisses. There's the first kiss, there's the makeup kiss, there is the obligatory kiss, there's a movie kiss. And I didn't even know really if I could write about this subject, because I actually found the idea of thinking about a kiss to be a little bit overwhelming for me. But then I read Brian Turner's piece. He wrote a piece in which he was talking about a last kiss, the kiss that he gave his wife for the very last time he saw her. She died of cancer. And I just thought, I don't think I can do that. I don't think I can write with such intensity and originality. But he kept coming back to me. So I thought, okay, I need to take this challenge. So I wrote something called The Revolutionary Kiss. I never created man before, so I invented my son first as a dream body. In order to create the dream body, I must first believe in the force of opposites, a terrible tension of what has existed and the struggle yet to come. And it is true that I had a notion of him for many years. For generations, my imagination traveled in search of him. It seems unlikely that a kiss would have its roots in the Haitian Revolution, but it does. Over a century ago, an uprising of hundreds of thousands of slaves freed themselves from chain and rope, from whip and guillotine, from bondage to the struggle of blood. They fought for 13 years in a revolution to stand on the shores of their own land, newly named Haiti, as free people. And they kissed the ground, however damp, with the blood of their mothers, fathers, brothers, and sons. Slaves, newly liberated, whispered my son's name. His body envisioned there, beneath the rust of shackles, beside shards of slave owners' homes, rising with the smoke of burned plantations, past the pinnacle of scoured light, past the canopy of trees dripping with the uprising of future leaves, my son begins his journey to me. Once there was a chain of kisses, as my mother said goodbye to her brothers and sisters lined in a row as she left Taiwan for America. A shock of lace around her neck as she waved to a country of ghosts. My mother's history was equally as complex. She left China in 1949 when communists led by Chairman Mao took over mainland China. My mother crowded into a boat that would take her to the coast of Taiwan, known as the Beautiful Island. Sorry. By foot, by boat, by train, by bus, by plane, it seems impossible these two histories intertwine so that one day I may find a dream body housed inside mine. All along, I wring my hands and worry. Will I know how to mother him? What language will I speak? What will my mother utter once she discovers the detour of my ancestry? When I woke, the doctor's voice was muffled and thick. My mind moved in syncopated pulses, and I pushed until all the energy drained and my body cracked open. Liquid gold rushed away finally, and now he arrived, a purpled creature, violet and squirming, face crushed into an emperor's expression. Born from the urgency of immigrants, how futile all of my years of worrying. I should have known my boy would row his small boat to me, regardless of the sky above that shook down its lightning. And even if the ground was bruised and famished of fruit and even freedom, he would continue on as if a force were lulling him to bedrock. Right here, between his eyebrows, there is a swell of light, a country where I belong, no longer a stranger to my own skin, my mouth to his temple. I hear a siren wail from afar. Tanks roll through the tail, squeaking, turning its heavy wheels. When I kiss him, history's weapons fall from my pockets, shields cast beneath atelier trees. I will now end my days of resistance, my lips searching the entirety of his dream face made mortal, my lost shadows now migrating in unison. Thank you.
Nice.
For listening.
Yay! Sorry, I brought you guys on. I was like,
it's okay.
No.
Okay.
The timing is so hard. But it was great. I love poetry. Like it reminds you of what language can do, you know? You're just like,
yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And I think that it was speaking to so many of the things that all of you were touching upon. Esther brought up such an interesting word, honor. And I think Milda had spoken about it again, this idea of even struggle being an honor, like to even have struggled with the idea. Because then I heard Kris talking, and this idea sort of like to look for that struggle, to look for, when I had children, I actually had to search for, well, what are the things that I really want to pass down to my children? And then I sort of had to look back, even this idea of saving face, which could, be, I don't know, it could come in many different shapes and forms. But I somehow also associated this idea of saving face with shame. And shame to me was always a very, shame, the idea of shame is a very negative association for me. So, in thinking about Esther's word, transformation, I actually wrote a story before this book came out where actually there was almost like a dream-like physical struggle between myself and my ancestors. Like I had to find a way to be able to allow that feeling to change, where I was struggling so much with what I thought that they thought of me in order to be able to even put these feelings down in a book. This idea of like, accept me. And then what if the answer comes back from ancestors, I don't accept you, or I don't accept your choices. There's also a transformation there. Like who transforms? My ancestors can't transform. because they're gone. They're no longer here. So then that means, and I almost feel like asking the question to Esther, like, I feel like then the transformation must be within me. It must be within the first generation, right? Here.
Yes.
Like, how do I come to terms with that? And that's a lot of what I come to terms with in the book too, is then the change must then be within me to either accept or reject. Maybe those aren't the only two choices of something that I think that my ancestors think and feel.
Well,
I think, go ahead, Christina.
Oh, sorry. I thought there was an echo for a moment. I was like, oh no. Helen Schulman once said something very interesting to me. I think this was right after my parents were not so psyched about my book. She said, well, you have to write like people are dead. Like, you have to just write like they're not here, and they're not going to interact with your work, and move forward that way. I thought that was pretty interesting, since they're very much were a part of my life. So, but then I kind of got a hang of it, and it kind of filled out the rest of my life. My literary world kind of squeezed them out, and then the rest of my life squeezed them out. So, so that was kind of interesting.
And that's a hard balance too, because people can, be dead or have died or passed away, but memories are very much alive. Like, memories are the thing that drives our writing. So I think it's a very hard balance, right?
It's the voices in your head, not necessarily, because frequently we'll stop ourselves before we even have the confrontation with whoever we think we might have the confrontation with. We're busy arguing with that person already, and we already know what that person's going to say, presumably. And we don't, sometimes, that can actually stop a lot of people, that conversation that they're having with the person, the voice in their head. So.
Mm-hmm. I think that sorry, go ahead, Kris. Kris, I'd love to hear.
I was just going to say, this is exactly why sort of early on, I felt like fiction was going to be the way out of that, because I thought, I'll never have to worry about writing about my mom or my dad or whatever, because I'll just change everybody's names. I'll make things up, and I won't have to, I won't ever have to face these, these hurdles. And then what I found really quickly was that my mother will find herself in any character. Like, there's no. I could write a story about if she's looking, she will figure somewhere that she belongs in the story, and it, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way, but. It was kind of freeing in a way, because I realized sort of, as I went into really my second book, because I made a very good effort, I thought, in my first book to make the narrator's background very different from my own. His father's out of the picture, his mother is a stewardess at an airline, very different from my mom. And yet there was still like ways that she was like, oh, I think this character is based on me. And so the second time around, it was just a lot easier to just say, okay, well, if you're going to go that way, then I might as well write what I want, because there's no hiding it, there's no escaping it. So I don't know. And
you bring up such an interesting point, actually, Esther. Your children are old enough to read your work, like as adults. Like you have adult children. They have their own children. But I'm really curious as to whether that, because you wrote a memoir when you had kids old enough that they could read the memoir. Like, many people that read at Penn Prentice wrote their memoirs and their children were like, 2, and they talk about like, yeah, I was kind of worried that maybe someday she'll grow up and read it, but you published your memoir and your kids are well and good enough to be reading. So have they responded? Did it affect you while you were writing it? Did you think like, oh my goodness, my adult children are going to read this and what are they going to think of me, or anything like that?
The only way I could plow through this, and I worked on the book for 5 years, and rewriting it and changing it and adding and subtracting, was by erasing everyone. I needed to forget that there was anyone but me. And I had to just like go back to my memories. I disclosed a lot. I made myself incredibly transparent. And I did not want, if I allowed anyone's thoughts, feelings, opinions to enter, it would have stopped me in my tracks. There's no way I could have continued. So I really felt I had to shut them all out. But what happened was I wrote it as truthfully as I could, and I have a son who is 38, and I have a daughter who's 32, and they both read the book after. I wouldn't let them read it until it was published, and I gave them a hard copy when it came out, each of them. They devoured the book in one day, each of them, and they were euphoric. They were euphoric. I mean, they loved it, which was wonderful for me to see. But I don't think we can allow a community of voices to enter our thought processes, because it's going to censor us. And Christopher, I wanted to get back to something you said. You were talking about how you were writing fiction in order to not have to write about those who could find themselves in your book.
Right.
The reality is your mother was in every character.
Right. She probably knew more than I did.
She found herself there because, even when we write nonfiction, I mean, what is this? We're drawing from our experiences. We're drawing from ourselves. I think nonfiction is autobiographical, and it's all about the people we've grown up with, lived with, experienced, observed, and ourselves. It's really very personal, but it's concealed.
I also think some of it's a little bit of projection, right? Like whatever you're projecting out, when you read characters, you're like, oh, that's me. It could be like the opposite, right? Like, but it's what you're seeing. So then you relate to it, in a bizarre way.
Yes.
It's nice that your mom reads your stuff.
Milda, your mom read all of your work, so that is pretty
It's true. In fact, she told me today she was really mad because my novel's not out yet. I'm like, I can't do anything about that. Like, the novel's done. I just need somebody to
I think for better or for worse, our mothers read our writing. I mean, that's why they gave birth to us, to, take in or to understand everything that we're creating, right? So, yeah, for better or for worse. Yeah, I mean, because I think that sometimes with the writing, when my writing goes out into the world, especially being a poet, my mother either does not understand it, or there's an admission I don't understand it, or there's an argument against it, and it's really interesting, because then it comes down to interpretation and truth. What is truth here? I mean, these are kind of age-old questions of like nonfiction. What is truth? Whose truth? Right. And I think also, that question, Milda, that you asked about, close family members interpreting the work, or have they read the work? It's really interesting, because I get that I get that really interesting question each place that I read my work. Has your mother read the book? Has your son read the book? And it's interesting, because maybe that goes back to what Christina was saying, is like, writing as if everybody is not, it's either dead or just not in the room. Like, I don't even think I ever really considered them, not their feelings, but just that I never considered them at all when I was writing the book. They couldn't be. I mean, going back to what Esther was saying too, you really have to write as if nobody is there, because otherwise I think the imagination would be really shackled in a way. I think to the point of just not being able to move forward. I think that's why commissioned pieces are so hard, because you have an audience in mind. And I don't even know if I had an audience in mind, because it goes back to what we were all discussing before. I didn't even really know who was going to be the reader for my book. I just thought, who is going to read this? And every once in a while, I think that stopped me a little bit in my tracks, where I had like a few days of like, who is going to actually read this story? And then working through it. I mean, I think that's the work of the writers, working through that feeling.
I just had a half-baked idea, so forgive me if it's still half-baked. But Tina, while you were talking, I suddenly thought, oh my gosh, it's like parent, like when you're writing, it's clear you're writing, and then you're going to have this product, and then people are going to see it. And when you're parenting, you're passing down some kind of value, or some kind of, do you teach your child manners or do you not? Like, there's all the same choices of what are you putting into this little human that you hope that people will see. Now, people may or may not see it, and the thing may or may not have it. Just like your book may or may not be like it, especially in poetry, like other people are going to read it and they're going to feel whatever they're feeling about it and in it and interpret it their own way. And I don't know, I just suddenly had this like, oh, isn't that like all those voices and all that stuff that we're putting in to our creations that last in the world. I don't know. It was very weird. I want to ask a really weird question. It's just like, never mind my half-baked ideas. But I want to ask a really weird question. And that is, Kris and Tina, how has your writing life changed since the last time you were with us? Because it has been a while for each of you, and your families have evolved. And I'm curious how your writing has evolved.
I'm happy to start. Yeah, we went from a small family, just my son, in a small apartment in Brooklyn, to now we're we've got my daughter who's 4, and we're in a house in Westchester, which I felt like very pulled away from all the stuff that used to inspire me so much living in New York City. I lived in New York City for almost 15 years. So it's been interesting. Like through my work, I've found myself trying to figure out how to write about this place a little bit in a different way. Writing, because I don't feel like I understand it as well as I used to when I lived in the city. I felt like I kind of had been there long enough to know how and why things work, and here it's still kind of a mystery. And then really just the other, I would say, finding the balance between the parenting and the writing has been a lot more challenging, especially I would say this past year. I'm sure, every writer, every parent is dealing with this, but
this year has been crazy for parents.
Yeah, I've been very lucky. My kids have been able to be in school, much more often than a lot of other people's. But, even just in the last few weeks, we've got snow days, someone's second grade classmate has got a positive test, and so they're quarantined. And so it's just been, I've been almost weirdly back to where I was before when I was writing my first book, and I was working like 5 different adjunct jobs, and I was just like scattered and all over the place all the time. And I just had to teach myself to like write whenever and wherever. This morning I was editing pages in the bathroom, like pretending to take a shower, because it was the only chance I was going to get all day to do it. It's all to say that all the schools were closed from the snow, and so it's like kind of in a weird way gone back around again. For a while there with my son, I was able to really plan things out and have work days and home days with him and things like that. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I feel such a close association to a lot of things that Kris was saying in terms of just the movement of parenthood, because I think that the first time I came to read for Pen Parentis, my children were very young. And I really felt when children are very young, you feel that very overt struggle between caring for their very immediate needs because they need you more, just the diaper changing and just everything, just caring, just physically carrying them. There were times back then where I would, my son would actually be laying in my arms, and I'd try to do a little bit of writing on the side, just in a notebook. So I remember that struggle. And I even remember the night that I read for Pen Parentis, I had to run home right away because I had to then relieve somebody else that was there caring for my children. And since then, I have to say that it has definitely gotten easier. Around the time that I had my son, I also became the Brooklyn Poet Laureate, and everything seemed so new and difficult to juggle. And then over the years, it became easier and easier. I felt like I had an office space that I could work out of. My children went into school, but very similarly to Kris, I mean, this past year, 2020 really just threw me for a loop. I just had never experienced, all of us had never experienced that level of challenge in terms of being a parent and being a writer. I think I felt some level of comfort because my book just came out and I just had a very, very busy year of touring that I was kind of ready, not for the pandemic, but I was ready to kind of sit down for a while. And I thought that that time would be so fruitful. I thought, oh, here I am at home. I'm going to get lots of writing done. It's like an extended residency. No, it's not. It's the opposite. It's like children, running around. They had like still, my son still is at home every single day because middle school, they haven't been allowed to return back to school because of the rising numbers and cases. So it has been very hard. Just an example, the other day in winter, I was looking for a cafe because I was trying to escape my home. And I feel like that's the writer's journey, is like finding a quiet cafe. It took me a whole hour and I still couldn't find a cafe that was either open to me or warm enough or made a good ham and egg sandwich. Like nothing happened. And I remember I came home after that hour, my husband asking me, like, did you get a lot of work done? I hope it was really productive. I'm like, got nothing
like my
done.
feet are wet and I'm freezing, and my hands don't work.
I'm freezing, I'm frustrated. And it kind of was just a picture of what the year felt like. I was just cold and wet and just frustrated. And I think that each of us have really, as parents, really risen to the occasion because we have to. When we have children, there is no other choice. If given the choice, or maybe sometimes it's not a choice, between taking care of our children and taking care of our art and our writing and our creativity, sadly, we have to take care of the children first. So it really has been about most recently, me carving out moments, honestly, between the hours of 11 p.m. and like 2 a.m. Mm-hmm. That's the only time where I am uninterrupted. There's no threat of a young child busting through the door and asking for my help or having a fight with his sister. These are the realities of being a parent of relatively young children. And to know, I was just so grateful thinking about Pen Parentis today, thinking like, I'm so glad this organization exists because there would be very few spaces where we would be able to just say this openly. As writers, it's frustrating. It's beautiful. I've never spent so much time, for good and for bad, with my children ever.
No,
when they're babies.
I mean, I don't know. I probably harp on this too much, but I always say, like, it's not an either or. Like, when you're a parent, you're just a parent 24/7. You can't measure a career against parenthood because you don't stop being a parent, whether you're at work or at home, or if you're working now. And the pandemic is when people are starting to recognize the fact that, like, these people are just parents all the time. Like, you can't stop. You even if you, like, I don't know, move to Hawaii and never see your children again, you're still their mom. You're just, you're John Irving's mom. You're like, you're the one that ran away. But literally, like, it's not a career. Like, parenthood isn't like a career where you can give it up and go try something else. Like, even if you give it up, you're still a parent. Like, that's it. So I like to redefine it as a life event that happens to you that is not balanced against your career as a writer, but it's just something that takes a lot of your resources of time, energy, and money, and brain space. And like, do you have the creative space in your head to be able to write? But that is like, if you have 5 careers, you're still gonna have to figure out, where does my writing fit in all my careers? Because that's actually something that you do figure out. But against parenting, like, you're the parent. Like, there it is. You have a kid. Done.
All I can say is I can't wait time like Esther and just have grandkids. Like, that would be really fun. That would be really fun.
Yeah, I wanted to take it back to what Tina was saying, because I was wondering, as you were describing, I totally remember those years of feeling I don't have enough time. I need, I was very involved raising the children, hands-on, totally involved. And that feeling of there's not enough for me, and I need time for me, and I can't find that time. And in your case, let's say from 11 to 2 a.m., which is difficult because it's eating into your sleep time, but you want it, and so you take that time. Do you think because of the constriction, because you're pining for it so much, because it's so precious when you finally get those few hours. Do you think you write even better?
You know, better is really relative. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's, I think that when you were speaking about this idea of pining for time, I think as a writer, I was always pining for time, even before my children. There were just other things that were asking for my time. Like back then, it was very similar to Kris. I had, you know, 5 or 6 different jobs. So that was taking up my time. And so I was always trying to reserve space for my own creativity. And then I would say, I can't tell if it's better, but I could say that the emotions that I had after I had children are so much more intense. Everything is intensified. So I could say that I'm writing with more urgency and more intensity now. I don't know if it's any good, because oftentimes I will have to write a great deal and then look at the mass of it as a big sort of large chunk of something on my desk. And then maybe even after a few years, be able to step away from it, to be able to allow some sort of self-criticism to be able to come in that makes sense so that I could make it into a project. So I'm at a very exciting point where I'm just at the beginning, because I finished Hybrida not too long ago and then was on the road for that I feel like I'm just at the beginnings of a new project. It's both frustrating and really exciting at the same time. You know, frustrating because I do wish, and I'm so aware, Esther, like I think to myself, you know, the hours that I'm up between 11 and 2 a.m., you know, those are like my health hours where I'm really supposed to be banking sleep and reserving so I could get up in the morning and be a more patient mother. So I give up my patience a little bit in the morning, and I'm a little bit groggier in the morning, but I was able to reserve that bit of space for myself. And, you know, I value that time so much. It's just perfect. It's perfectly quiet. And I value just listening to my footsteps on the wood floor, just walk across the room to my desk or the couch to be able to do something. I cherish it so much because I get so little of that quiet and time and space.
So I want to be respectful of everybody's time, particularly the viewers who are watching, and all of you guys for giving up your time to come and talk with us today. I do want to tell the viewers, whether you're watching it now or whether you're joining us on a replay, that we are definitely here next month on Tuesday, March 9th. The theme is identity, and the readers will be Brian Van Dyke, Dylan Landis, and Angela Himsel. So we are super excited to have them, and we are so grateful to have these fantastic readers. Thank you, Kris Jansma and Esther Amini and Tina Chang.
Thank you.
It's good to see you, Christina. And thank you to all of you wonderful viewers.